Good morning, distinguished listeners. Today we will embark on a journey through biblical history and its meaning in Abrahamic religions. Our video today will focus on the life and works of a fundamental character, Ishmael. Ishmael, a name that resonates in the pages of the Bible and in Islamic traditions, represents an intriguing figure in religious narrative. His story, his divine promises, and his descendants continue to impact the world today. In the next few minutes, we will explore the details of Ishmael's life, the promises God made regarding him, and who the descendants carrying his legacy are today. As we delve deeper into these topics, I hope we can better understand the enduring importance of this figure in the history and culture of the Abrahamic religions. Without further ado, let us begin our exploratory journey into the life and legacy of Ishmael. Before delving into this topic, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so that YouTube notifies you every time we publish a new video. Let's get started. Ishmael is known as the son of Abraham and Hagar the Egyptian. His birth is a fundamental starting point in his story. To understand this event, it is essential to go back a little in time. Abraham and his wife Sarah had long wanted to have a child, but Sarah was barren. In search of a solution, Sarah allowed Abraham to have a child with his servant Hagar. This marked the beginning of a complex story full of nuances. Ishmael was born as a result of this union between Abraham and Hagar. His name, Ishmael, has a deep meaning in Hebrew, which is God hears. This name reflects the special circumstance of his birth, in which God heard Hagar's cry in the wilderness. However, Ishmael's birth also created tensions and rivalries within Abraham's family. The relationship between Sarah and Hagar became strained due to Hagar's motherhood, triggering a series of significant events in Ishmael's story. One of the highlights in Ishmael's life is the divine promise of great descendants. This promise is found in the book of Genesis in chapter 16, verse 10 onwards. Let's see what the biblical text says. The angel of the Lord also said to him, "I will multiply your descendants so much that they cannot be counted because of the multitude." The angel of the Lord also said to him, "Behold, you have conceived, and you will bear a son, and you will call his name Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction." In this verse, we see that an angel of the Lord appears to Hagar in the wilderness and gives her a promise of blessing regarding Ishmael. God had established a promise of blessing between Abraham and Sarah, but Sarah and Abraham doubted that promise since Sarah was sterile. For this reason, he gave Hagar to Abraham so that he could sleep with her and have a son. Although Abraham had a son with Hagar, however, that was not the promise that God had promised to Abraham. In chapter 17 of Genesis, we see that God tells Abraham that he will have a son with Sarah, and with him he will sign his eternal covenant. When God says these words to Abraham, Ishmael was already a 13-year-old teenager. Surely Abraham's concern was what will happen to Ishmael. God, knowing Abraham's heart, also makes a promise of blessing for Ishmael and tells him that 12 princes will come from Ishmael. Let's see what he says in Genesis chapter 17, verses 19 and 22. God answered, "Surely Sarah your wife will bear you a son, and you will call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as a perpetual covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have also heard you. Behold, I will bless him and cause him to be fruitful and multiply greatly. 12 princes they will beget, and I will make him a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you this time next year." And he finished speaking with him, and God came up from being with Abraham. In these verses, we can clearly see that Isaac is the son of promise, since our Lord Jesus Christ came through his descendants. Now, in chapter 21 of Genesis, we see the birth of Isaac. The biblical story narrates that after Isaac was weaned, Ishmael mocked him. Sarah came to see this problem. For this reason, Abraham decided to take Hagar with Ishmael. The biblical story narrates that Hagar and Ishmael wandered in the desert of Beersheba. The water to drink had run out. Ishmael, being in agony, sat under a bush and raised his voice and cried. God heard the voice of Ishmael, so the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What have you got, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy. Where he is, get up, lift up the boy, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." The biblical story narrates that God opened the eyes of Hagar and saw a fountain of water. She filled the skin with water and gave Ishmael a drink. And after this, Ishmael grew and became strong in the desert of Paran, south of Canaan. He was a bowman, and God was with him. Ishmael married an Egyptian woman, founded Ismailia, and was the father of 12 princes, just as God had promised to Abraham. Let's read Genesis chapter 25, verses 13 and 15. These then are the names of Ishmael's sons, named in the order of their birth. Ishmael's firstborn, Nebaioth, then Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mizma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphis, and Sedema. According to the biblical account, the sons of Ishmael occupied the region that goes from Havilah to Shur, which is to the east of Egypt, towards Assyria. There they lived in open opposition to all their relatives. Their home was the desert of northern Arabia and eastern Syria. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 7 onwards, we see that Ishmael, together with his brother Isaac, buried their father Abraham. Finally, Ishmael died in Arabia at the age of 137. His descendants are the Ishmaelites, and they settled between the border of Egypt and the Persian Gulf. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 25, we see that the Ishmaelites led the caravans that brought the products of Arabia to Egypt and Mesopotamia. Over time, its name became almost synonymous with desert towns. According to the biblical story, Joseph was sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites, and they took him to Egypt. Now after Sarah died, Abraham married a woman named Keturah, and with her he had 6 children. Let's read Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 and 2. Abraham took another woman whose name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimram, Yoksan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. According to historians, it is likely that there were mixed marriages between the Ismailis and the descendants of Abraham and Keturah, whose descendants occupied some parts of Arabia. Since Ishmael and Midian were half-brothers, any intermarriage of their respective descendants, mixing blood, customs, traits, and occupations, could have given rise to the interchangeable use of the expressions Ishmaelites and Midianites. Since if we see in Genesis chapter 37, verse 36, it narrates that the Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar, and the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. But in Genesis chapter 39, verse 1, it says instead that Potiphar bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites. So when Joseph was taken to Egypt, Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian man, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. According to historians, these Ismaili and Midianite peoples were eventually called Ismailis and later called Arabs. They all proclaimed themselves descendants of Ishmael. Arabs mostly practice the Muslim religion. It is important to understand that not all Arabs are Muslims, and that not all Muslims are Arabs. The relationship between Arabs and Jews is complex, but it is important to remember that not all Arabs hate Jews, not all Muslims hate Jews, and not all Jews hate Arabs and Muslims. We must be careful to avoid stereotyping people. However, in general terms, Arabs and Muslims have a rejection and distrust of Jews and vice versa. The oldest root of bitterness between Isaac and Ishmael does not explain all the current hostility between Jews and Arabs. In fact, for thousands of years in the history of the Middle East, Jews and Arabs lived in relative peace and indifference toward each other. The primary cause of hostility has a more recent origin. In 1948, after the Second World War, the United Nations gave a portion of the land of Israel to the Jews. The land at that time was inhabited primarily by the Arabs, the Palestinians. Most Arabs protested vehemently against the nation of Israel occupying that land. Therefore, in less than 24 hours after Israel was established as a nation, the Arab nations united and attacked Israel in an attempt to remove them from that land. But in the end, they were defeated by Israel. Since then, there has been great hostility between Israel and its Arab neighbors. If we look at the map, Israel occupies a small strip of land and is surrounded by several much larger Arab nations, such as Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Egypt. Now, the religion of Islam, to which a majority of Arabs belong, has made this hostility even deeper. The Quran contains some contradictory instructions for Muslims regarding Jews. At one point, it instructs Muslims to treat Jews as brothers, and at another, it orders Muslims to attack Jews who refuse to convert to Islam. The Quran also introduces a conflict as to who is the true son of Abraham's promise. The Hebrew scriptures say that he was Isaac, but the Quran says that he was Ishmael. The Quran also says that it was Ishmael whom Abraham almost sacrificed to God, and not Isaac. This debate over who was the son of promise contributes to the current hostility. This divine promise is of great relevance in the history of Abrahamic religions and has significant implications, since it establishes the basis for his role in history and his influence on the nations and peoples who consider themselves his descendants. The figure of Ishmael is not only relevant in the context of Judaism and Christianity, but also plays a fundamental role in Islam. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael is considered a prophet and patriarch, which is why he is given a special place in religious history. A particularly notable aspect of Ishmael's relevance in Islam is his connection with the construction of the Kaaba in the holy city of Mecca. According to Islamic tradition, Ishmael and his father Abraham played a crucial role in the construction of this sanctuary. The Kaaba is the holiest place in Islam, and Muslims around the world direct their prayers to this shrine located in Saudi Arabia. The story of Ishmael and his role in the building of the Kaaba is an essential part of the Islamic faith and is remembered and celebrated at important religious events, such as the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. Dear listener, when we explore who the descendants of Ishmael are today, it is essential to recognize that the Arab peoples play a central role in this narrative. The belief that Ishmael became the ancestor of many Arab tribes derives from tradition and religious interpretations in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This belief has influenced the identity and history of Arab peoples throughout the centuries. The Arab world is made up of most of the countries of the Middle East, including the entire Arabian Peninsula and the nations of the Maghreb and the Horn of Africa. Today, millions of people who consider themselves Arabs also identify with the figure of Ishmael as their common ancestor. This historical and cultural connection remains an essential part of the identity of the Arab peoples and contributes to their sense of unity in the midst of diversity. The cultural and religious identity of the descendants of Ishmael, that is, the Arab peoples, has been deeply influenced by their connection with this biblical ancestor. This influence is reflected in their language, their traditions, their religion, and how they see themselves in relation to biblical history. This historical connection remains an essential part of the identity of Arab peoples today. The relationship between the Islamic people and the people of Israel is a complex and multifaceted issue, encompassing historical, political, religious, and cultural aspects. Both groups share religious roots in the patriarch Abraham. Abraham is considered a prophet in Islam, and his role in biblical history, including the story of Ishmael, is recognized in the Quran. The Holy Land region, which includes sites holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, has been a point of historical tension over claims and control of these sites. Jerusalem, in particular, is a sacred city for both Jews and Muslims. The esplanade of the mosques, known as the Temple Mount for Jews, it is a highly contested place and has been the focus of conflict for decades. Muslim tradition says that the place where the Temple of Jerusalem was located, that is where their prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. And it is for this reason that in the place where the Temple of the Jews was, today the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock and the Dome of the Chain are built. That place is very special for both Jews and Muslims. And it is for this reason that the Jews cannot build their third temple, since if they demolish the Muslim mosques that are in Jerusalem, a war would break out between Arabs and Israelites. Listening friend, with all this data, we come to the conclusion that Ishmael's story to this day has a lot of influence. Since this story explains one of the reasons why the Arab countries and the Jews do not get along, despite being brothers, since both are descendants of the patriarch Abraham. My beloved brothers, I invite you to pray for these two nations, and especially for Jerusalem. In Psalm 122 it says, "Ask for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you prosper." And so we come to the end of this video. Thank you for being part of our channel. God bless you greatly. And without further ado, I now say goodbye, and I will be with you in the next video.